Hello, my name's Sam Brentano. I'm Marion County Commissioner. We have a pretty interesting program for you today. We've asked different people that have knowledge on the new regulations that have to do with the legalization of marijuana. A lot of issues there, and we're going to get a chance to look at it to educate the public and really educate ourselves about all the things. Before I start, kind of an editorial comment. I voted against this measure, as did the majority of people in Marion County. But since it's passed, it's now become a law and we'll make it available. But it's always been my goal, and I think the goal of the other commissioners, if I can be presumptuous enough to speak to them, that we not make Marion County a center of growing trade, whatever, in marijuana. And that's probably what I hope to find out more about how we can limit its effects. So I have with us, to start with, Rob Bavette. He could be Beauvais, he says, but the Association of Oregon Counties, and he's kind of a leading authority on the issue, dealt with the legislature and represented AOC in the counties. So let's get right into it, Rob, and see what you can tell us. So maybe start out and just telling us about your background and experience, et cetera.
Sure. Well, I'm Rob Bovett. I'm legal counsel for the Association of Oregon Counties, as you know, Commissioner. Prior to that, I was the elected district attorney for Lincoln County. And prior to that, I served 16 years in county council, which means county lawyer for Lincoln County. And then prior to that, I did some work with legislative council, the folks that actually craft legislation. So I've had a long history of working with and around the legislature. That's my background. In terms of my current client, which is the Association of Oregon Counties, of which Marion County is one of 36 members, we're proud to say.
Probably the best, but you don't have to say that.
Well, you know, on this program, I think I can say that.
All right,
That's pretty safe to say. AOC, my client, is actually agnostic on marijuana. It's my job to protect local control and local rights, both for those that want to have marijuana businesses and those that don't. Those that want to regulate them further than the state will be regulating them, and those that don't. So with that in mind, you and everyone else had me working on legislation to improve and clarify a whole lot of issues in Measure 91, which is actually quite a lengthy measure.
Maybe you might as well just get into it. What exactly did people vote on, and what is the general outline of what it means?
Yeah, Measure 91 really has two big components. The first is what I call the personal allowance provision, and that operates statewide uniformly. What that basically says is that adults 21 and older can possess certain amounts of marijuana and marijuana products in their house, certain amounts in their car, without being prosecuted under state law for that. Essentially decriminalization. That went into effect July 1. The second big part of Measure 91 was all about the regulation and taxation of retail marijuana through businesses. So we're talking about for-profit businesses that grow, that process, and that sell recreational marijuana. So there are two big pieces. Most of the second part hasn't gone into effect yet. It doesn't go into effect until next year, although we have now what we call early start sales. So the legislature passed a bill that allows existing medical marijuana dispensaries to sell certain limited retail products. That started October 1 and went into effect statewide, except those counties and cities that opted out of the early start sales. So that's kind of a thumbnail of how we got here.
I'm kind of getting back to the role you may have played, because I know you did, but the legislative issues themselves, talking with the legislature and crafting what it was. For example, I'm making it up, but maybe you can tell me wrong or not. Oregon didn't include the edibles that I think are one of the worst parts of it that we're seeing in Colorado certainly, and now somewhat in Washington. And did you work on that or things? Tell us the different things that went into coming up with what we got.
Well, we wound up with a 157-page bill. Measure 91, among ballot measures, statewide ballot measures, was fairly well crafted, but it was incomplete. And it needed a lot of work and a lot of tweaks. So we learned a lot of lessons from Colorado and Washington. You mentioned one, edibles, which we were really lacking adequate authority at our Oregon Health Authority and Liquor Control Commission to wrap regulations around those in terms of appropriate serving sizes, labeling, packaging. Colorado experienced some very hard lessons early on. And so we went to the legislature and asked them to essentially learn those lessons and not make us go through all of that trauma and drama. But there were a lot more issues that were...
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm not
Yeah.
quite finished with it.
Sure.
So will we be seeing edibles at some time? Is that what you're hinting about? Oh, I thought we were going to avoid it completely.
No, we will see some edibles, probably not until, at recreational, until really a year from now, maybe the fall of 2016. But they'll be packaged in a certain way. They'll be limited in terms of the amount of THC, the active ingredient that can be in
Candy type products?
Well, they'll be limited in terms of those types of things as well. But yes, there will be some candy type products that, at least under the current rules, will be allowed. Now, whether the legislature chooses to close any of those things in 2016 still remains to be seen.
I think I interrupt you more in the legislative. Was there other issues?
Yeah, a lot of different issues. We had to clean up a variety of things relating to taxation, both at a state level and local. The original Measure 91 had a taxation scheme that nobody liked, so we replaced it with a sales tax. We clarified local authority to have a local tax. We clarified local opt-out paths for various marijuana businesses, enabling counties, at least on the west side of the Cascades, to put things before voters next November to see what types of businesses local voters want to have.
Which we will be doing here, by the way.
Well, there you go. So Marion County is doing that. I know of a few other counties that are doing that as well, especially counties in which, frankly, Measure 91 didn't pass. We clarified local authority to have local time, place, and manner regulations, as well as land use regulations, so we don't start citing marijuana businesses in places that if they were just a regular business, we wouldn't allow. So clarifying that type of local authority. Those were kind of the big things that I worked on, but there's a myriad of others in that 157-page bill.
On my list, and you're already getting at it, with city and county issues, any others that perhaps we need to deal with or that are out there yet?
Yeah, I think that all of the counties really need to start looking at all of the ones that don't opt out, and you are kind of in the middle. You don't know whether you're going to opt out or not until the voters speak next November. But you probably ought to start looking at the OLCC rules, which just got finalized a couple of days ago. They cover a lot of ground, but they have a lot of gaps. And I suspect that many counties that are going to have marijuana businesses are going to want to fill some of those gaps with their own local regulations. I know, for example, Marion County was a leader in developing regulations for medical marijuana dispensaries. And I happen to know that a number of other counties essentially plagiarized from your ordinances because they were very well crafted. So at some point in time, you may want to begin the process of looking at the retail side should your voters choose to allow that to occur in unincorporated areas of your county.
Maybe again you've gotten at it, but what's next then? You said you're going back to the legislature, craft some more, tighten up a few more, work on edibles for me.
I'll work on edibles as well. That will be an ongoing project. Yeah, we've identified at least 6 issues that we want to clean up in 2016 in the short session. I would characterize them all as technical improvements because whenever you write a 157-page bill in the course of about 2 weeks is when we wrote it, you're going to miss a lot of things, and we certainly missed a lot of things. And so we've identified at least 6 of them that need to be cleaned up. But again, more along the lines of technical amendments. The one substantive amendment that I think we do need to clean up is the distribution of state tax revenues, which the current formula doesn't make a whole lot of sense to many people.
Rob, I could go on, and I've got other questions. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk to you, but thanks so much for coming in today and adding, and congratulations. Keep up the good work is what I'm trying to say.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Janet Carlson, Marion County Commissioner, and my guests today are Joe Fenimore from our Planning Department and Scott Norris from our Legal Counsel Department. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And Joe, how long have you been with Marion County?
25 years.
25 years, wow. And you've moved up so that you're the kind of the head guy of planning, right?
Right. I started out in code enforcement and worked my way up through the years.
Excellent. And Scott, you've been with Marion County at least as long as I've been there, I think so.
For 15 years.
Wow, 2 years before I got there, so that's pretty good. And your area, how did you get roped into this marijuana issue as a legal counsel?
Well, I advise, among other departments, I advise the planning department, and the marijuana issues relate primarily to planning and land use.
Excellent. All right, so Rob Bovett, who was just in the last segment with Commissioner Brentano, talked about the ordinance that legal counsel helped us craft, I'm thinking it was 3 years ago, was it? When we had or was it 2 years ago? Anyway.
It was about, I think about it, about 3 years.
About 3 years ago, when medical marijuana passed. And so then we were looking at actually creating an ordinance that would deal with medical marijuana. Time, manner, and place. And we included that because that was allowed in the legislation that was being drafted at that time. So, so that's one ordinance that we've done as Marion County, and that still governs our medical marijuana businesses, right?
That's correct.
But now, as we heard in the last segment, recreational marijuana has passed through Measure 91 and then through the legislative tweaks. So how does that recreational marijuana passage affect our ordinance on medical marijuana?
The medical marijuana dispensary ordinance is still in place, as you mentioned, is still in effect. The new statutes dealing with recreational marijuana are separate, and the ordinance does not, the existing county ordinance does not deal with recreational marijuana.
Right, so we're going to need to actually amend our ordinance in order to deal with recreational marijuana, correct?
That's correct. The board will need to determine what and how many time, manner, place regulations may be necessary for recreational marijuana facilities if recreational marijuana facilities are allowed after the November 2016 election.
Right, so that we had, and Commissioner Brentano mentioned this, so the commissioners just recently passed a second ordinance about marijuana, and that was to place the measure on the ballot and have the voters of Marion County, and all the voters of Marion County get to determine this, right? Whether or not marijuana, I think it's both medical and recreational marijuana facilities, it would be retail facilities, grow sites, processing sites, will be allowed in the unincorporated areas of Marion County. So why did we get to do that?
There is a specific provision in one of the laws that the legislature passed in 2015 that specifically allowed local governments to what's referred to as opt out of any one of the 6 types of marijuana businesses that are referenced in the laws. There are 2 medical marijuana forms of business and 4 recreational marijuana forms of business. And each of those is described in Marion County's opt-out ordinance.
So we're going to place that on the ballot, and actually the impact of placing that on the ballot means that everything sort of freezes, right? We've given notice to both the Oregon Health Authority on the medical side and to the Oregon Liquor Control Commission on the recreational side that we're placing this on the ballot, and that means no new businesses. So Joe, we actually have 2 existing medical marijuana facilities that were allowed to sell recreational, right? October 1, with this early start that Rob talked about. Why just 2?
That was all that we had go through our ban exemption permit process in the last 2 years. We had one the first year, and then they renewed, and we had another one go through the process and get a permit to operate a dispensary. Those are the only 2 we have in Marion County at the present time. So when we adopted the ordinance, the opt-out ordinance, their grandfathered and can continue.
Right, and you're reminding me that ordinance that we passed way back when, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it was, on medical marijuana was actually banning marijuana in Marion County, and then we allowed a ban exemption permit.
Yes.
And that was kind of a clever way that we had in order to be able to deal with that. So we have the 2 then that get grandfathered in. They can continue to do recreational and medical sales all the way to the election? Is that the case?
I'm not sure how long they get to continue the recreational sales. I'm not sure that's been established yet.
If the OLCC rules take effect sooner than the election, then what happens? Scott, you look like you might know.
Yeah, under the early start statute passed by the legislature, early start runs from October 1st, 2015 through December 31st, 2016.
Okay, so it would be for the full year then.
Yes, the bill had what's called a sunset clause, meaning that it is repealed as of December 31st, 2016.
All right, and then we put passed a third ordinance the same day we passed the ordinance about the putting the measure on the ballot, and that was the 3% tax. And Rob mentioned that as well, that the taxation part of the Measure 91 that the voters passed was a little bit unclear. And so this, I think the compromise was that they allowed the state to tax, what was the percent at 17?
For early start, it's 25% starting January 1st, 2016. Then after early start ends, starting January 1st, 2017, the tax rate goes down to 17% for the state tax.
And then if we tack on 3% locally, then that would be a total of 20% on those businesses, right? It's a business tax.
Yes, it is. It's a sales tax. So
Right.
it's a tax at the retail level.
And then counties get 10% of that 17% that's statewide, something like that.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. So let's go to the OLCC rules, because the difference between medical and recreational it's pretty stark, I think. So medical marijuana, you could not have grow sites in agricultural lands. In the new law, recreational marijuana is considered a crop. So can you talk about how that's going to influence planning's thinking as we start revising this ordinance should the voters turn down that ballot measure?
So the legislature said marijuana is a farm crop, and and people have right to farm in EFU zones and farm zones. And so counties, if they don't opt out, have to allow it in their farm zones. In addition, they can allow it in forest zones. They can also allow it in rural residential zones where they allow farm use.
Now, can we shape that by our ordinance and say that certain zones can't, or does the legislature trump whatever we would say in that regard?
You cannot touch it in the farm zones.
Okay.
You can craft stuff in the other zones, and counties are already doing that. And,
So we could say farms, but not forest, not industrial, or, for example.
and my understanding is you may also be able to say, in a rural residential zone, only certain types of farm use are allowed, or indoor only, those kind of things. So there will be options to address that part of it.
Now, when we're looking at retail sales as well, and right now we've added some time, manner, and place. So I think the medical marijuana legislation said you couldn't be within so many feet of a school. We added so many feet of a daycare center, of a park. We added these things. Now, you will actually, if the ballot measure fails, have to have recreational marijuana in separate facilities. Is that correct?
I'm not 100% sure what the OLCC rule is on that.
Okay.
I don't know if it's said not under the same roof.
I believe, if I remember
I saw
correctly,
this on the news. I think.
yeah, the new regulations do not allow both medical and recreational to be under the same roof, in the same door.
So would we craft in our ordinance certain locations that recreational businesses could be, and
We can do the same time, place, manner regulations similar. One item they did that was pointed out, the medical marijuana dispensaries have to be 1,000 feet apart by OHA rules. You can require up to 1,000 foot buffer for recreational recreational marijuana sales facilities. You can't go more than that, though.
okay.
That's where we're at right now. So we're going to watch what other jurisdictions are doing this time, and maybe we can plagiarize from them a little bit.
And because we have this time period to put it on the ballot, we have a little bit of time to do that thoughtful process.
Correct, and we'll probably go through the land use process is what I'm planning to do.
So I guess the bottom line is people will need to stay tuned. If they want more information about this, where could they go to get information?
They can go to OLCC. Oregon Department of Agriculture has a lot of information out there. As far as which jurisdictions are opting out and which aren't, that is on the OLCC website. I checked this morning, only one city in Marion County has opted out so far, and that's Jervis. So if you're interested in starting a business, you need to check with the local jurisdiction. If you're in the city, check with that city. If you don't know, you can call the planning department at Marion County, and we can look that up for you and let you know.
And we'll put that phone number on the end of this program. How's that?
Right.
All right. Well, really appreciate you being here and shedding some light on this very complex topic. And so thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kevin Cameron, Marion County Commissioner, and I'm here today with Deputy District Attorney Brendan Murphy. And Brendan, welcome to the program on marijuana.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have your expertise here today. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background and your role with
Great.
the county and the District Attorney's Office.
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I was a child abuse prosecutor on the child abuse team for the last 7 years, and then our office created a management position out at Juvenile, which is a juvenile division of the DA's office. We have lawyers who work out there, and we do two things at the juvenile division. We both help DHS when children are taken into protective custody or foster care, and in addition to that, we deal with any type of conduct that committed by youths would be a crime if they were adults. And so I've been out there for about 2.5 years now.
Okay, why don't you share with us what is legal under Measure 91? I think specifically probably from a personal standpoint,
Sure.
and not the commercial side.
So recreational use has been legalized by Measure 91, as your viewers now know, and specifically it's about 8 ounces of regular marijuana, which is just about the size of a sandwich baggie, just so people can relate to that, and 4 plants. In addition, 16 ounces of solids, and that's edibles, so a brownie with marijuana in it, for example, and 72 ounces of liquid. It also legalized up to 1 ounce of retail extract, so not homemade extract. Homemade extract is both illegal to create as well as illegal to possess, but you can possess up to 1 ounce of retail extract.
Great. So, and we heard in the earlier segment about the ordinances that we have filed that would affect unincorporated Marion County. Those will have no impact. I just wanted to be real clear with our voters on anything in the city of Salem or any cities that are incorporated. But the other thing I want to stress, or maybe those ordinances, will they impact any of the individual rights that you just described?
No, so this is now the statewide floor, and so all citizens can possess, as long as it's not in public, those amounts as I described. So users can make up to 4 plants, for example, growing, so long as it's not in view of a public place, they can possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana. So those regulations are those business regulations, but as it comes to personal use, those amounts are what are allowed under the law.
So if somebody lives in unincorporated Marion County, they can drive into Kaiser or Salem today and purchase and possess marijuana legally in unincorporated Marion County.
They can possess it, absolutely.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, good. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about some of the impact that you're concerned about on our youth, and then some of your enforcement from the district attorney's office, what your priorities are.
Great, and this was a conversation with ballot measure 91 that whether good or bad legalization of marijuana, I just think the youth and as it applies to youth was sort of left out of the conversation. And so as we look at how we protect our youth from marijuana, a lot of things we're focusing on come from how it applies to the youth in our community. And so, for example, we turn a lot to Colorado and Washington, and we look at what happened in those states. Colorado, for example, saw a 40% increase in expulsions and suspensions from school based on drug behavior, and so that's concerning for us here locally because we know a lot about now the school-to-prison pipeline. When we talk about youth being expelled from school, that doesn't help them down the road. And we look at, although it was legalized for adults, it still remains illegal for kids. And so as we talk about normalization, children becoming used to watching their parents consume marijuana, what does that mean for youth in our community? So 70% of the 12 to 17-year-olds in Colorado who reported using marijuana reported they did so and knew their parents did as well. Statistically, only 20% of kids who use marijuana that don't know that their parents use. And so over a 50% increase. If kids knew their parents were using, they were more likely to use as well. And so as we learn about normalization and children become used to seeing their parents consume, we need to be very thoughtful and very careful about how we treat youth in our community. What happens when a youth shows up to school with a joint in his pocket? It's much more serious than a cigarette, and we need to have a lot of conversation around youth justice issues on those points and make sure that people understand that just because it's legal, it doesn't mean that it's safe.
Right. So, and also the difference between charges between somebody who's a minor or under 21 versus somebody who's a minor. Can you talk about some of those
Absolutely. So when it comes to minors, it's still illegal, and it's still illegal all the time. And so we need to be careful that we don't criminalize a class of our community just because they're not over the age of 18. And now, small amounts of marijuana are still violations, the equivalent of a traffic ticket. Mm-hmm. But yet, as it becomes more normal, one of the things that causes me as a deputy district attorney a lot of concern is delivery within 1,000 feet of a school is still an A felony. Now, what people think of when they think of that is this scary person on the corner selling to little kids, and that makes sense. But what they don't take into account is that a delivery can also be two students sharing a joint behind the school bleachers, and that can be an A felony. And so that's an example of what we need to be careful of when we think in terms of justice and we think in terms of fundamental fairness, how we're responding to some of the gaps that were left out of the conversation when they legalized marijuana.
So one of the things that has been a concern, I think, in some of the other states is the driving under the influence. Can you talk about some of the challenges there versus driving under the influence of alcohol and law enforcement and your ability to protect people?
Sure. So obviously, DUII is one of the fundamental concerns that we have from the Marion County District Attorney's Office. It's one of our policies as far as making sure the community is safe for the operation of motor vehicles. And for a long time, alcohol has had that bright line rule everybody knows about, the .08. But that doesn't exist for marijuana. And so DUII cases can be some of the most difficult cases that attorneys prosecute, and it's even more difficult when we don't have those kind of bright line rules that have been ingrained in the community and the culture, such as .08. And so we are having to retrain all of our law enforcement officers, reevaluate how we go about prosecuting these cases, and really taking a fundamental step back and really just learning on how to do these cases well and making sure that our community is safe, because absolutely we're seeing very intoxicated people through marijuana operating motor vehicles, which is it's just a real safety concern.
Sure. And in my conversations with law enforcement, I think maybe it was the sheriff or with the chief here in town, they were talking about the number of drug recognition enforcement officers that are available. So the time law enforcement, if somebody's under the influence, obviously they do the field sobriety tests, they take them in and they don't test positive for alcohol, but there's still an issue here. Mm-hmm. Now we have to call a DRE officer, which there's very few of. We're not trained. And it takes several hours for them to go through that process. But for you to have a good case, that's currently what has to happen.
It's critical. It is critical that we have someone who can articulate kind of what they're seeing and make sure that everyone understands that they're objectively looking at someone who's adversely affected to the consumption of marijuana. Great. It's critical.
So just to kind of recap before we close here, you're working on education of youth, right, through various programs. Do you have anything that's out there in the schools today that we can talk about?
Well, we've been in good contact with the North Marion School District. We've done outreach, even at Chamawa Indian School, for example, to make sure that the youth are aware. We have members on our child abuse response team here locally in Marion County, our MDT. We have Salem's Kaiser School representatives. So we're making sure we're doing outreach to the community.
Great. Well, Brendan, thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope that as this moves forward, we can continue to keep the public safe. Appreciate your service.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today in this program. And in November of 2016, Marion County citizens will have another opportunity to say whether they want to have the recreational businesses in the outlying areas of Marion County. Again, this won't affect the cities that are incorporated, but the ordinances that will be on the ballot will make a difference in Marion County. And we thank you for this program, and hopefully you've learned some things today.